So, welcome to Module 3 in EDU 350. If you need anything, this is my email. I am Professor Sarah Rice. This module is about environment and other factors to consider in curriculum design. So, in this module, we have these 3 learning outcomes: explain the importance of cultural responsiveness and the physical environment in curriculum design, discuss how culturally responsive teaching meets strategies meet diverse learner needs, and analyze and adapt curriculum to promote a positive social and emotional climate. Um, so, essentially, what we're trying to do in this module is we're talking about how do we affirm identity and culture, how do we connect learning to students' lives, and how do we support social and emotional learning. So there's a lot of reading in this module, and a lot of course materials. So each one connects to each. This is the ones that connects to each module to kind of break it down for you. So what we're doing in this week, what we're doing is we're focusing on 3.1 and 3.2 learning outcomes in this presentation, and then in your module 3 assignment, that's when you're focusing on the third learning outcome, which is adapting to promote a positive social emotional climate, and these articles can help you to do that. So introduction. So why are we discussing, for example, social emotional learning, culturally responsive teaching, social justice, and equity all within the same module, and how are they related? So equity, multicultural curriculum, and social justice, they're all essential components of modern curriculum, and they are important in order to really be able to create a curriculum that supports diverse cultural backgrounds, identities, and lived experiences. So, what is culturally responsive teaching? When we think of, we're going to talk about what is culturally responsive teaching, and how we can transform classrooms with culturally responsive teaching. So in Illinois, we have these culturally responsive teaching and learning standards, or teaching and leading standards, and then your discussion this week has to do with those. We also have some other learning standards in the state of Illinois. So we have the early learning standards for preschool pre-K. We have the Common Core standards for reading and math, and then the science and social studies standards, as well as the social emotional standards for the state of Illinois that you'll be exploring the social emotional standards as well. So what is culture responsive teaching? There's this video in your learning that you will watch called Buzzwords Define Culture Responsive Teaching. And in this video, you should focus on these 4 parts. So what does it mean? What's a welcoming space? What's a relevant curriculum? What's a culture of respect? And what are family connections? So these are kind of the 4 things to focus on in this video. There's this other video, the 7 principles for culture responsive teaching. And when you are watching this video, you can think, take notes on what is culture responsive teaching, and then here are the 7 principles. So affirming identities, personally inviting, culturally and physically, and inviting high academic achievement, accommodating differences of perspectives, classroom management, consistent, and individual and collective interests. So taking notes on what are these 7 things, what do they mean? So then we also have the guiding principles of culture responsive teaching. So we have the culture responsive teaching is asset based. That's the first guiding principle. So there's a deficit perspective and an asset perspective. So culture responsive teaching is asset based. So when we are designing curriculum, we need to it should be asset based, which means you're valuing the students' backgrounds, you are recognizing how families can be involved, you are giving students multiple entry points to the knowledge. So you're not just giving them one way to learn it, you're kind of thinking about different learning styles. Culture responsive teaching supports and challenges students. So we want to have high expectations, but also have high support for our students. There's something called the productive struggle. So you really want to have students go through this productive struggle where you're giving them the instructional support, you're giving them a safe space, but then you have these high expectations for them. And then you're also honoring their history privilege, and you're advocating for your students and addressing inequities in curriculum. The third guiding principle is culturally responsive teaching places students at the center of learning. So remember that you already know this stuff, right? We are teaching it to our students. So what are we going to do in order to ensure that our students can learn it? And then culturally responsive teaching leverages students' linguistic and cultural backgrounds. So again, this kind of has to think of it, this goes back to being asset based, right? How can you leverage students' linguistic and cultural backgrounds in order to ensure that they can learn the content? So for example, using students' home language to support with cognates would be an example, allowing students to answer questions in their home language, things like that. And then finally, culturally responsive teaching unites students, schools, families, and communities. So you want to make sure that everything is connected, right? Together we can succeed. So we want to make sure that everything isn't in isolation. And we remember that, and we're we're actively working towards creating bonds between the families, the school, and the community. So in the discussion this week, you're going to be applying your knowledge of culture responsive teaching. And you are going to use the culture responsive teaching and leading standards, G and H, and you are going to then pick one of these scenarios and answer these questions based off of the teaching and leading standards and based off the scenario that you chose. And then when you reply to your peers, these are just some examples of what you can do. You can offer constructive feedback. You can share additional insights. You can connect ideas to course readings or best practices. You can give examples of how they can expand or adapt it for another grade level. Or you could always apply your personal experience or align talk about how your experience maybe differs from what a peer might say. Which I notice oftentimes, right, with these types of scenarios, especially if you have classroom experience, the reading can say to do one thing, but you might have noticed in your classroom that maybe a teacher that you worked with did something different. So that's something you can also talk about when you're responding to your peers. And then finally, we're going to talk about equity in curriculum design. So what is equity? Equity, so there's a difference between equality, equity, justice, and agency. So the equality is the assumption that everyone benefits from the same support. So you can see here, everybody has the same box, but not everybody gets to see the baseball game. So equality is thinking everybody gets the same thing, right? Equal. Equity is everyone gets what they need. So for example, he has the ramp so that he can see the baseball game. She has the 2 boxes, he doesn't need a box, and she gets 1 box. Okay, it's equitable because now they all have what they need to see the game. Justice is you can all see the game without support or accommodation. So the cause or the inequity, right, which was the fence, is now addressed. So now they move the systemic barrier. You don't need these supports anymore because now everybody can see the game. They remove the systemic barrier. So equity, you still have systemic barriers, but everybody's kind of getting what they need in order to support to achieve with the systemic barrier. Justice is when you're removing the systemic barrier. Agency is through equity and social justice. So agency is a combination now of equity and justice. And now everybody has access to health, education, the wealth in order to everybody's able to now buy a seat in the stadium. So now you don't have any fences. You don't have to look over a fence or through a fence. Now you can just go to the stadium. So that's the difference between equality, equity, justice, and agency. So when we are thinking about our students, we want to think, how are we promoting student agency through our curriculum design? And, how are we, and then how are we promoting, this combination of equity and justice in order to get agency for our students? So in your reading, you have this chapter on equity in Making Curriculum Better, How to Build SEL Equity and Other Priorities in Daily Instruction. And when you're reading, you can reflect on what parts of this visual, right, like why are visible in the article. So just thinking about culture responsive curriculum and environments, right? Why they matter, how they work, and how to adapt and analyze a culture to create a culture responsive curriculum and environment. And then the definition of multicultural education. So multicultural education integrates diverse cultural perspectives in the curriculum to promote inclusivity and equity. So here you have from least transformative to the most transformative practice of multicultural curriculum. So this is like it's a continuum. So there's, just the mainstream, right, which would be teaching Thanksgiving from the pilgrim's perspective. Then you have just the contributions approach, right? So heroes and holidays. So you only talk about Martin Luther King Day without discussing systemic racism, or you'll talk about Rosa Parks, but that's it. And then you have developing practice, which would be additive integration stage. So now maybe you're talking about including women farmers, or talking about Black doctors, and in lessons about professions. So, you're really thinking about how can you be more inclusive overall. Transformation approach, you are teaching both Native American perspective and a Pilgrim perspective on Thanksgiving. And then social action approach would be the most transformative, where you're writing letters about food deserts or organizing a peaceful protest. So these are kind of this is like the continuum. So when you're designing curriculum, you really want to think, how can you make it as transformative as possible for your students to take social action, because that social action is directly connected to this equity and justice, which promotes agency. So if you think of this, for example, here's an example of the transformative approach, where here's the experience as after an Islamic school was vandalized with graffiti. A fourth grade students organized a visit to deliver cards to support and clean up their graffiti. The students created a video advocating against hate, demonstrating how they led social action can foster empathy and community engagement. So this would be an example of a transformative practice. And then here are the 6 commonly shared ideas about multicultural education. So first, equal opportunity for all students must reach maximum potential, preparing students for participation in multicultural society. You want to teach students how to embrace changing demographics, encourage active participation in ending oppression, create inclusivity, student-centered classrooms, and then re-examine educational practices for equity. So again, multicultural education is about equity, justice, and empowering students to thrive. So here we have this equity and justice is directly connected to multicultural education, and we want to promote that agency to want to promote change. And then, so this was your PLC discussion that I already mentioned. And then finally, the assignment. There's a separate video about the assignment, but essentially you are picking, if you're ECE, you're doing how to be a good friend. If you want to choose ELE, you do flipped coin, you pick one or the other. You are going to fill in the correct template, the ECE template or the ELE template. You're going to choose a case study for that specific, modify the lesson for that case study, and then write a reflection.